But we're going to talk again about our other major theme on the programme this morning, Bradwell. We're looking at the impact of a new nuclear power station, the impact that it would have on the area, the impact it would have on St Peter's Chapel, which has stood in its lonely spot for centuries, locked for the first time earlier this year because of the coronavirus pandemic, but concerns raised that any changes to the local area would have an impact on the chapel there itself. We're going to have a chat now with Nicholas Henschel, the Dean of Chelmsford and Chair of the Bradwell Chapel Committee. Good morning, Nicholas.
Good morning, good morning.
Thank you for joining us this morning. What concerns would the committee have about a new nuclear power station so close to St Peter's Chapel?
Well, the chapel, which is, as all listeners know, is a remarkable place. As Elizabeth said in your first thing at 7:15, a liminal place, a place kind of on the margins, both physically and spiritually, a place where people of all faiths and none find an extraordinary sense of presence. Now, that chapel stood there since 654 AD. It's the oldest church building in the UK of any sort that's still in use. And it's the 19th oldest building of any kind in the UK. So this is a remarkable, on any level, I'd say spiritually it's a remarkable place. Historically, in terms of our context and culture, it is the most remarkable building, not just in Essex, but in this part of the country. That so few people know about it sometimes amazes me, but I also love that sense of isolation and its purpose as a place you seek out. And therefore, its context, it's not just this building built out of Roman stones about 2,000 years old, Bison said when he arrived, but it's about that place in our lives for the marginal, for space for God, space for ourselves, spiritual space. Let's use that kind of generic term. And the context of such a space is remarkably important. And therefore, the Bradwell Power Station's been there for many years and has been defunct for most of the last 2 decades. So there's always been a power station just around the corner, except this new proposal would simply blot out the landscape. The huge bank that would be alongside the main road down to the power station, the fencing, as many people have already commented. And I think the thing about spiritual space is it's quite vulnerable. I know that having a city centre cathedral, the way we have to curate the space in such a way that it retains its beautiful quality in the middle of a busy city in Chelmsford is kind of really important part of what we do. In the same way, curating the space at Bradwell Chapel, which the cathedral's been responsible for a century now. In fact, we would have been having centenary celebrations of that relationship if coronavirus hadn't hit, with major festivals this coming month, because, as said, the builder of the chapel is commemorated on the 26th of November, and we were looking forward to leading into that with a real celebration of the relationship between the cathedral and Bradwell Chapel, if you like, the first cathedral of Essex back in the 7th century. And I think the gentleness of the space, the beauty of the space, and its culture as natural. Okay, there are wind farms everywhere, but actually they add to that. So I think there are huge reasons why the chapel is an incredibly unique, utterly unique and special place. And the tragedy of infringing on that. There are many arguments about why the power station itself is economically outdated, and as you know, tariffs come out. Alternative energy is now much cheaper than nuclear energy and so forth. And I think the economic arguments against the new power station and the political arguments against the new power station are really easy to make, but I'll leave that to others to make those points, because that's not my department, if you like, but I think they're important. But I think, above all, it's this absolutely unique treasure in the heart of Essex, which, as you say, is typically open 365 days a year, day and night. I think I mentioned when we had to lock the chapel during coronavirus, we didn't even know if we had a key. It's an open public space for anybody to use for their spiritual purposes, but utterly a space which speaks to our hearts and speaks for me of the Christian God who said came to speak of to the people of Bradwell and Essex back in the 7th century. So I think it's not just our heritage and unique and incredibly important heritage. Where else? I mean, the oldest church building in the UK, the 19th oldest building of any kind in the UK. This is right up there. It's actually regarded as one of the greater churches, even though it's the size of a small barn. This is an absolutely unique space, and from what I've seen, I've never forgotten the moment I first saw those plans, and the way it infringes on the ecology of the chapel really means it would destroy a huge part of what the chapel represents.
But the chapel itself will be safe. It's not going to be damaged by the building. And as Stephen Bray told us just after 8:30, this project is projected to bring in thousands of jobs and supply energy to millions of homes. How do you balance that against one church?
Well, I think the thousands of jobs and millions of homes. I used to live in the northeast where wind power was becoming the norm. Blyth in Northumberland is the centre of wind power generation, and the building wind power and solar between them will beat on price and on availability. Nuclear in the next, well, already almost does, and certainly in the next 10, 20 years, as Elizabeth said at 7:15, nuclear is now old technology. Which I think people just don't seem to take them seriously. We just have, Germany has completely got rid of its nuclear energy for precisely that reason and for security reasons. The thousands of jobs, well, actually, a very small number of people will be actually employed at this vast power plant, but the price of it will be the building of new roads right across the Dengie Peninsula, changing again the ecology of the Dengie as a whole, and a migrant workforce, people coming in and out. I don't know some of the details of that because none of the details were CGN's involvement, of course, in this. I was surprised that we didn't talk more about that. This is a company that's been blacklisted by the American State Department as somebody we shouldn't be working with. Now, I have no comment on that and no expertise in that area, but I'm fascinated that nobody seems to be terribly interested in the fact the major partner in the Bradwell Power Station is a firm blacklisted by the American State Department. Now, that's politics, and I'm not going to try and dabble in that. I think the point about the chapel, well, let me give you another Essex image. Well, it's not Essex anymore, but the former Essex image. But in Four Weddings and a Funeral, the funeral that takes place at St Clement's. Oh, it is in Essex, in Thurrock. St Clement's in Thurrock. And there's an extraordinary moment. Now, St Clement's in Thurrock is a Grade 1 listed building, tragically no longer used for worship. Why? Well, when the camera pans out from the church, you see it's absolutely dominated by the massive Procter & Gamble plant in Thurrock. And that's exactly what St Peter's will be like. It'll be a small ancient building completely dwarfed by this vast, overwhelming building structure, which will, in fact, not just dwarf the chapel, it'll completely wreck the ecology of that part of the Dengie and particularly the village of Bradwell.
Stephen Bray mentioned that the groups behind the power station are working with local groups in the area to study the impact it will have. Is the Bradwell Chapel Committee one of those groups?
I mean, individual members have, but I was very struck that when I wrote with copying my letter into English Heritage, I didn't receive a reply. Now, that's odd because technically we're the people who are responsible for the chapel, this incredible ancient monument. So our architects also tried to talk with them as the person responsible for the fabric of the chapel. Again, they're simply not interested. We're small fry. We're just this little ancient, we're just responsible for this little ancient building. Which I don't think they fully understand the significance of. And if this was Iona or Holy Island or Canterbury or any of those well-known centres, this wouldn't even be a conversation we'd be having because the building itself in its power and its significance would already be recognised. My real hope, is that what will come out of this for the chapel is a full recognition in Essex and indeed across the country of just how significant this place is. This extraordinary space in which spiritual things are very close, and we now live in an age where those things are taken a lot more seriously than when I was growing up. So I think the significance of Bradwell now is even more important for us, for Essex, and for our culture than it ever has been.
What reassurances would you like to hear about the future of the chapel?
Well, the problem is we only own the immediate land round it. Literally, there are 4 boundary posts at the 4 corners of the chapel with about 2 metres. So we own the chapel, the land on which it's built, and 2 metres round it. And, of course, there are other landowners involved in a complex way across that part. It's very difficult for us because we look pretty powerless because it's just this little ancient building in the eyes of the developers. We could have stuff coming right up to the boundaries of the chapel and be able to do nothing about it. Our neighbours, the neighbours of Bradwell Chapel, the Athona community, are likewise really concerned. They've lived there for decades. serving as a kind of retreat centre and a place for reflection. They're very nervous about what rights they may have over the land right up to their walls. Now, they've lived there as a place of quiet reflection for decades. It's very difficult to do that next to a noisy industrial plant, especially when it's been built. So I think it's not about the actual chapel or a phono community next door. But if you've got a massive factory next door to your house, you probably know about it, even if you've still got a garden.
Are you concerned that access to the chapel could ultimately, at some stage, either in construction or once a station is in place, are you concerned that access could alter so that it puts people off visiting?
There are no plans for that. I mean, that's one bit that is reassuring, because the road to Bradwell, that's the ancient Roman road that's been there for 2,000 years. The road from the chapel going straight into Bradwell village that's a key road. Although it's one of the very few access points to the whole of the coast in that area. And of course, one of the great ways of approaching Bradwell, which I do regularly, is you walk from Ongar along the St. Peter's Way. That's a 3-4 day walk. And then you approach Bradwell Chapel from the south along the sea wall, the most amazing way of seeing it. Of course, that view will be completely destroyed, because all you'll see is Bradwell Chapel with a massive power station behind it. So I don't think anybody's suggesting, because there are farms in that area too, which will still be there, that access to the chapel itself will be affected. I think what people are raising big questions about, and Elizabeth spoke very fluently about this at 7:15, is actually the nature of that access, which at the moment is through flower meadows and farms, is going to be totally destroyed. And so it's not the access itself that will be denied, it's the ambience and culture of that access which will be changed forever.
Nicholas Henschel, Dean of Chelmsford and Chair of Bradwell Chapel Committee, thank you for joining us on BBC Essex this morning.